Oh, hello there. I was lost in thought. So, here we are, deep into our journey into the lands of shadow. If you still haven't finished your journey, I will be speculating on everything we see there in the Skadu or Erdtree land, and sharing many of my very crackpot thoughts. Now, that is to say, I think it would be better to experience the journey of the land of the Erdtree in their own way, without being shown it through the eyes of a simple crackpot. So, if you are still hesitant to get things like that shown to you, I would suggest continuing your journey and returning later. Well, oh my, what a vast and encompassing land I found myself in. So many mysteries and oddities I found while combing every corner I could of the Erdtree land. Very mysterious. I came away with many more questions than I had answers, but a few things really came to highlight, and I really enjoyed my journey. So I thought, other than going with too deep on any one thought I had over there, and let myself ruminate on them a little bit more. And for now, maybe we'll do some smaller, very speculative ideas and share them with you for fun. Now, just so you know, these are some pretty scattered thoughts that I've had, and with the warm words and comments I've received from my previous ideas, I feel much more confident in the idea of having a little bit of fun with some out there ideas. Right, let's begin. Starting off, I would like to talk about a certain cadaver, and fair warning, this does involve the final fight that we witness within the Land of Shadow, so there you are. Is this cadaver Mohg? So for a long time, I was led to believe this was a corpse of Mikula being left here, but given what we see throughout the Lands of Shadow, and the bits of Mikula's body he leaves behind on his journey, I'm left with the idea that this was just a misconception we were given through the dialogue of Mohg. Truthfully, I'm not sure we can trust anything Mohg has to say about Lord Mikula, as at the time he seemed to be completely under Mikula's thrall. For all we know, these are just details that he was implanted with to further to his inevitable destiny of being defeated by the Nameless Tarnished. So anyway, to my statement of thinking that this cadaver could be Mohg's cadaver, let me add some context. In both Sewer Fight and in Godwyn, Mohg doesn't leave a corpse, he dissipates. Though this is true for many demigods and beings we encounter in the lands between, I think there is enough evidence to suggest that omens tend to leave bodies behind when they are defeated. This may have something to do with their disconnect from the Erdtree, meaning that their souls and bodies don't rejoin with it, so they're left just sitting in the lands between, not really dying and just being trapped within their own corpses in a way, I suppose. Morgoth's appearances are also another example of this. We get to encounter Morgoth a few times where he isn't really dying. It's almost like he's inhabiting something to present his body. And then when we do defeat him proper as the last king, we find he does leave a corpse, one that is without his omen horns and is shriveled and in a rather sorry state. I also think it's important to consider the twinning nature of Morgoth and Mohg, and how their situations parody each other on numerous occasions. Both their bloods become inflamed by the Formless's mother's presence, despite the fact that Mohg is the only one that seems to have made an agreement with the Formless Mother. Both shared this fact that their omen horns have enfeebled them and made them disconnected from the Erdtree, and both seem to be able to have alt versions of themselves manifest, either within the bodies of others, or perhaps in Mohg's case, in the blood of others. It's hard to say, because like the situations in which we see Mohg's other forms don't quite give us indication that he was possessing anybody. as we only see him kind of there. The only time he comes into being is when he comes out of a pool of blood, kind of like the Sanguine nobles that also do this. But whether or not they're also copies, it's hard to tell. But my speculation here is that if Morgoth was to leave a corpse behind, surely Mohg should leave a corpse behind as well, and then it could be absconded with by Miquella for his grand plan. But we never see that happen. And the similarities between the body inside this cocoon and Morgoth's body are a little bit too much for me to ignore. They're both these shriveled up, hornless beings that do have a lot in common, and it just kind of like clicks for me that two corpses should have a link in some nature. There's nothing to suggest that Miquella's corpse should look anything like Morgoth's corpse when he leaves that behind. I think there's going to be a lot of speculation going forward about how this corpse or cadaver inside this cocoon has large reaching implications of who the identity of it actually is. And I think a lot is going to be looking at the ring that we see on his hand and what the implications of that is. Ansbach also suggests that Miquella used Mohg's body in order to get to the Land of Shadows, and we do the exact same thing upon touching the withered arm within his bedchamber, so this might be the conduit in order to reach the Land of Shadows. Needle Knight Letter is also reserved in calling this cadaver Miquella's cadaver, which is something that a lot of people assumed was going to happen, but she never does, despite the fact she uses Miquella's name as often as possible, but yet hesitates here. If you would like to use a bit of narrative evidence, it is strange that Morgoth took Miquella's body and the cocoon only to then put Miquella back into the cocoon once reaching Mohgwyn. Of course, at this stage he should be fully enthralled by Miquella, so every action he takes should be in line with what Miquella wants. So we'll see how that plays out as we find more details. Also, though I'm aware that Mohg's body was utilized in Miquella's plan, there has been some past shenanigans with doppelgangers of bodies being used for inhabitation. One of the other characters we can look at is Hyetta. I think it's a very similar situation to what we see go on in the Land of Shadows. But to me, this seems to line up quite well with circumstances that we see physically and narratively. Godwyn as the Black Sun or Star. So I was hoping to find more details on Godwyn in the Lands of Shadow. His presence there is very confusing to me. From what I did glean, I think there's strong evidence to suggest that Godwyn, being the black sheep or black sun / star of the family, is spotted around in a lot of imagery. So Godwyn seems to have adopted gold and lightning into his being from his family and his union with the ancient dragons, and I think there's something to be speculated here about Godwyn's lineage. He may be the bastard child of Marika. Now, I do think that Godwyn is Marika's child, but I hesitate to believe that Godwyn is anything to Godfrey outside of his name. And from his knights and his staff, I think he has more association with black than gold, being perhaps the Negretto to the albedo of the family, if you understand my alchemy reference. In the new Death Knights imagery, we see a lot of black sun haloed in gold and lightning. It's all major imagery surrounding them, and even in the Death Prince's staff, we see that it is a mostly blackened staff with an amber gold on it. This has led me to believe that the name Godwyn the Golden might be one of the biggest fictions in the entirety of the Golden lineage. So this one's a real out there idea, but I think the imagery of the golden halo and the eclipse being associated with what I would deem this black sun Godwyn is a big mystery surrounding Godwyn's birth, and I think it's left very open within our vision of the lands between, and much more speculation can be done and investigating. It's just an idea out there. Pre-Elden Ring kids. So my thoughts here is that, did Marika have children before becoming a vessel for the Elden Ring? I think we should keep this in mind, as there's been a lot of talk about how the shards of the Elden Ring and how that lineage even works. So why does this matter? Why is this important? Well, I think the key thing here is that Messmer does not have a great rune. This is one of the strangest things within the story that I've found. Miquella gives up his great rune. Makes sense why we do not obtain a great rune by the end of the story. Messmer should have a great rune if he's part of Marika's lineage when she has the Elden Ring. This makes me think that Marika didn't become its vessel until after the Divine Gate incident. Another great lore hunter for the lands between is a creator by the name of Jack is a Mimic, and he had a really interesting idea about the great runes being inherited at birth. I'm not sure if I agree with this notion just yet, but the Lands of Shadow have definitely led me to speculate that this could be a possibility. I'm not quite there yet, but the idea that Messmer did not inherit a great rune would speak very highly of this thought process. I do believe that Melina has a great rune, or had a great rune at one point, and isn't pre-Elden Ring birth, I guess, in this situation. But it is a very out there theory that I kind of was holding, that Messmer is the first child and may have even been conceived before Marika and Radagon became one as well, and may have been their child, their first legit child outside of this union. And although I don't quite agree with the idea that the great runes are inherited at birth, I do think it's a good idea to humour, because it leads to a lot of very, very interesting avenues. If true, this would mean that Marika's children have all been born cursed, even before the seduction or manipulation or union between Marika and the Greater Will in creating the Golden Order. So this could imply that there is something to do with shamans' bodies that inherently creates curses, but it may even be something different. It may also assume that a different Empyrean may have cursed Marika to have a cursed child, and there is a particular Empyrean that we discover in the Lands of Shadow that does confess to cursing Marika, literally or metaphorically, up for debate. So Marika's bloodline and inheritance has a lot that we can still dig into. I think we should really keep this in mind moving forward. Also, as a side note, I think it is explained that Marika was doing things and having divine powers before becoming allianced with the Greater Will. Marika's incantation, the minor Erdtree, seems to be wholly her power before interacting or becoming one with the Order Capital, as you can see in its description. I think it's easy conclusion to make that the Erdtree's power and the ability to grow these magical minor Erdtrees came from Marika and not the Greater Will or the Golden Order. Only the Elden Ring, or maybe even the fuel or the watering, came from this power. Potentially, Marika, once possessed of the power of the Greater Will and the Elden Ring, was able to use her blood to water the minor tree to grow to its maximum strength. This may even been where Miquella conceived of this idea. Again, massive speculation here, but you know, that's what this is about. We're just having a bit of fun, you know. Putrescent Knight is Radahn's horse. This one is just true. If there was a hill for me to die on, I think this might be the one. It's quite fun. I like this one a lot. Radahn's faithful steed is not given a name per se, but let's call him Leonard. For reasons. So the Putrescent Knight is Saint Trina's guard before her chamber, and in turn is a putrescent remains of a horse. It is a horse's skeleton riding on the bloated skin body of its other half. Icky, I know. So given the circumstances in which Radahn is rediscovered, horseless, it seems like to me that Leonard should have been there at his side, but instead we find him at St. Trina guarding like a watchful spirit. And this horse seems to be using long spinning aerial attacks and slams and heavy twirling attacks that are very, very reminiscent of Radahn. Minus the gravity, of course, as it'd be weird for him to use gravity magic. Instead, he replaces this with Ghost Flame because it is a putrescent spirit. There is some kind of mimicry, even intentionally or unintentionally, going on with this horse guardian to mimic Radahn. There's even a point where they raise into the air and rain fire down upon us in a strange kind of mimicking of the time where Radahn does the same, where he becomes a meteor and like bombards us with several waves of damage. It also makes a lot of sense to me that St. Trina would share a lot of the preferences for her guardian or other half to Miquella's choices for these same things. To me, it would seem strange to not have at least a small reference to Radahn's literal soulmate steed that he loved so dearly to not be referenced in following his coattails. But you're happy to disagree with my notion here, but to me it fits just right, and I love it. It's one of my favorite things that I thought about when I got to this section. So my last speculation: Radagon and Marika were fused in a jar. Yes, it's highly speculative, but my thoughts are Marika was put in a jar with Radagon to be joined in order to create a divine rebus or being or god in the trove of what the actual Hornsent wanted, and they succeeded with Marika and Radagon. This is their first success story of having a divine being created through strange circumstances. The combination of the red male and white female is all over the story of the Lands Between. If you want a little bit more of a breakdown on this concept and its uses through the ideas of alchemy, I would highly suggest the work of Max Derrett. I have literally seen 2 things post my thoughts on the Lands of Shadow, and one was his. It's a very good video on talking about that combination of white and red and its like detailing and how it relates to alchemy and the concepts of the void. It's very good. I suggest it. So the combining of red and white is indicative to most of alchemy and the Magna Opus. Let's just say that there's something going on there, very all over the place in the Elden Ring lore. Anyway, the combination of the right mixture of elements in a thing called a pelican jar would produce through 3 or 4 stages the Philosopher's Stone or the Rebus, perfect being. In the Lands of Elden Ring, the attempt to create a divine being or god is seen throughout, and many different concepts and methodology is going on in the background from different cultures and different races of producing their lord in a way. But let's say for a moment that the shamans were persecuted and abused because of their unique body types, and they seem to be primary females making up the white feminine half of this experiment the Hornsent did, as they could blend easily with other beings, as seen through the toothed whip and other ideas around there. So the idea that they were producing that white half of the formula means that the red half would have been the male or masculine half of that formula, and it seems they've used unwanted or criminal beings in order to fill in this gap and shove them in the jars for this blending experiment. I would imagine that in this scenario, Radagon was a criminal of some kind used to make up that red half. And this would explain a lot for Radagon's history of being potentially a seamstress or seamster in the Lands of Shadow, because in the description of the golden sewing needle it talks about how he brought that along, and it's seen in a lot of his iconography to do with sewing and his lattice symbol, and the way that we talk about sewing mouths shut and using it as a seal. Something interesting to think about. So we see all the malformed failures coming out of jars in all the gals around the Lands of Shadow, and if I'm assuming that the Marika Radagon union was a success of this jar experiment, I would think that would potentially explain the great betrayal that the Hornsent felt from Marika, because they were trying to create this divine being, and when they succeeded, that divine being saw fit to exact her vengeance upon their kind, effectively genociding their species. This was most likely because of the horrible circumstances Marika's people, the shamans, who had inflicted on them by the Hornsent, which was cruel, and so her vengeful was wrathful, and she became a wrathful deity by their own creation. We could even speculate on Radagon's and Marika's relationship before this union. What was Radagon's crime if he was somebody who was put into a jar? Could it have been the conception of a child with Marika? A child perhaps that might have had the ability to burn the spiral tree with his kindling? Deeper still, it could have been his co-inhabitation of his soul with the abyssal serpent. It could be a very strong blasphemy, considering the implications that might have on the Land Between. And what the Void is in the Lands Between is also its own kind of rabbit hole, but effectively it could be what is described as the first chaos, or the primordial substance before the greater will. The Abyss is very kind of like a universal idea, and the absence and abyss of the universe is kind of something utilized in alchemy also, so there's a lot of parodies going on here. So that kind of leads up to the evidence that I was also thinking about Mesmer potentially being birthed before the union of Radagon and Marika and the Greater Will, but it could have happened before or post this combination of these two characters. I also think that the scar most jar combined maidens seem to have on their forehead might later have become the Marika's Saw Seal from the successful union, so the end result resulted in a more unified thing, and that's what she used to create her new order, was this scar that she almost appropriated, for lack of a better word, after her torment and this hardship trial she went through before reaching divinity. Well, there it is, some more Crackpot thoughts. I hope everybody enjoyed, and perhaps that's all they are, just a series of Crackpot thoughts.